Started. So good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jason James. I am a senior web developer and UI UX lead here at UCSF Web Services. Today we're hosting a webinar with Canopy Studios about the 5 common design mistakes, how you can fix them. A little bit about Canopy. So Canopy designs, builds, and supports websites for clients who want to make a positive impact. We work with them quite a bit here at UCSF, and they are great partners, and they do really, really good work. A little bit about Cliff. Cliff is Canopy's manager of creative services. He leads their creative team to craft user-first experiences with initial strategy through UX, creative, and technical development. This results in websites that excite clients and fulfill their objectives. Cliff delights in working with organizations to elevate their online presence, making complex challenges beautiful, functional, and optimized. We are providing a live captioning via Zoom, so if you need that, you should be able to enable that on your end. Let us know if you have any issues. A reminder that there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Please use that throughout the presentation to ask any questions of Cliff. When the presentation's over, we'll address all the questions. The presentation should be about 15 minutes, and there'll be about 10 minutes left over for the Q&A. So from here on out, I'm going to turn it over to Cliff. Let's start.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to join with us today to talk about 5 common design mistakes and how to fix them. Thank you, Jason, so much for the introduction. We're actually going to cover 5 common design mistakes and a bonus mistake today as well. And to quickly give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about today, we'll be talking about carousels, intrusive pop-ups, tiered and mega menus, buttons, animations, and autoplay videos as well. So our first section is going to be about carousels and why carousels sometimes presents a design challenge for users. So from a marketing or designer standpoint, carousels are a great way for users to experience a lot of content without taking up a lot of browser real estate. At least that's what the intent is. But what you'll find with most carousels is that, especially if you have banner carousels or homepage carousels, people will often miss information. What studies have found is that users do not scroll beyond the first option that is presented to them in most 100% with carousels. Carousels also present increased cognitive load on the users, especially if you have multiple items that are quickly scrolling by the user. They have to constantly readjust their visual sightlines in order to properly access content. If the motion is also repeating, it also tends to increase the cognitive load. And in many cases, mobile issues occur because carousels do not scale down one-to-one on mobile devices. So what you find is that users will miss content. There's an increased cognitive load on the user to actually access the information. And if they're accessing that information on a mobile device, that information sometimes will be too small or too inaccessible for them to actually read the content. So what is the solution to carousels? Well, there are several design patterns that are in use today in modern design that can reduce or remove the ability or the accessibility issues that carousels see. The first of which is using card design patterns, which allow users control of the scrolling behavior. Users can take the time to actually access and parse information as needed, which is shown in this section here on the left. Use content grids. Using grids of content to present information is also a great way to avoid having to use carousels. We find that users are confident in scrolling, especially if they're on mobile or tablet views. So having a larger real estate for that information is not something that is detrimental to design. If carousels are the only option that you'd like to use, we recommend a clear call to action on each slide in your carousel. That allows users to continue their journey throughout your site. Allow users the ability to control the carousel. If they are not able to parse information, they should always be able to move forward or backwards within the information stack in a carousel. And our last recommendation is pause the carousel on hover. If a user interacts with a carousel element, they're most likely interested in that carousel element. And by pausing, you allow them the cognitive time to process the information that's presented there. So carousels are a great way to implement a lot of information, but there are some issues with cognitive load and mobile accessibility. And you can get around this by using grids or providing some added user controls to your carousels. Our second option, I think, is one that everyone on this call has probably encountered, which is intrusive pop-ups, kind of the, hey, look over here section. Pop-ups usually serve some kind of marketing goal. There is a conversion that you'd like to make, and thus you're presenting that opportunity to users. Now, the problem with pop-ups are they affect accessibility. Almost all screen readers do not have the ability to clearly parse pop-ups. If someone is using an alternative method for accessing the web, for example, their keyboard, pop-ups can create these things called keyboard traps where users are not able to exit the pop-ups themselves. And I think the biggest one-to-one effect of pop-ups negatively on websites is Google does not like them. It actually ranks pop-up websites or websites that create blockable content lower in their search engine rankings. So what are the better options for pop-ups? We consider displaying content in a sidebar an effective option that does not distract users and also presents the SEO advantages that you would get without using a pop-up. If you have to use a pop-up, we would consider delaying the opening of your pop-up so it's not immediately accessible to users when they first navigate to the site. They're partway through their journey and more motivated to try and complete that if the pop-up does not immediately appear. Last but not least, try to design pop-ups so that they're not intrusive. Try to make sure that they don't take up more than 50% of the viewport space. And this way you present information that has probably a marketing stint, but also does not distract the user from their completed journey. Next up, we have a common design pattern that we're seeing in modern web design today, which is tiered and mega menus. And the motivation behind tiered and mega menus usually comes from the need of, we have a lot of options. We would like to present all of those options to the user in one go. And this leads to what I like to call the Costco ketchup rule. Now, the Costco ketchup rule states that the more options you have, the more time it takes users to process that information. There's actually a UX term for this, but I like to call it the Costco ketchup rule because usually in Costco, there's only one brand of ketchup and it usually requires no processing to grab that single brand of ketchup. So why should you care about mega menus? Mega menus, while they do present a lot of options, they once again increase the cognitive load on the user. The user has to spend time parsing the information within a mega menu. They also have to spend time understanding what the filtering mechanisms for that mega menu or how the categorization in that mega menu is organized. Mega menus are usually not optimized for mobile. And what that means is the user spends time scrolling through large amounts of data just to find the single important thing that they want. And last but not least, once again, is accessibility and also search engine optimization, which means that multi-level menus are challenging for screen readers to parse, and keyboard traversal is almost non-existent for a lot of commercial and mega menus that we see online. So what are the better options for mega menus? Using multi-menus that are tiered to a single level of navigation, meaning that the user does not have to go down multiple levels to surface information that's relevant to them. Direct users to alternative navigation options. Search is a great way for users to find what they want without having to interact with a large menu system. I'm sure everyone here has had the opportunity of shopping online, and the first thing you probably do is gravitate towards search as opposed to trying to filter through a large menu system. Last but not least is create easily identifiable category sections. So in this example, you'll see on the prototype on the right, there are easily identifiable sections for the user to interact with and parse data. Mega menus are great when they're implemented properly, but they do present some accessibility issues. I do see that there's a question. Can I clarify what a multi-level menu is? A multi-level menu is one such that the user has to progress past the main menu, a submenu, and then a tertiary menu to find what they want. So an example of this would be something like this H&M site, where you're actually going down into the main menu, then you're going down into the women's section, then you're going down into clothing specific options. So a multi-tiered menu just doesn't present a main navigation and a secondary dropdown, but you have to progress beyond multiple levels to get what you need. Now, the solution to a multi-tiered menu would be to direct users to things like search or trying to consolidate categories into easily identifiable sections. And this leads into our next option, which is buttons. Buttons are a great way to present choice to a user. If you want a user to move through your site, it's a great way for a web designer or a UX designer to create a specific journey for users. The problem arises with buttons when you start to run into presenting too many options to the users once again. Once again, this is the Costco ketchup rule, which is you want to clearly identify what your primary options are and what your secondary options are. What you'll find is that if you have too many CTAs on a page, you will find that the user spends a lot of time parsing the information rather than actually interacting with those buttons. It inhibits action. It distracts the user from their goals. So what you want to do is not necessarily reduce the amount of buttons on your page, but reduce their visual importance. So what you're going to look at is things that are the most important call to actions and making those stand out, as opposed to secondary calls to actions, which are less likely to be interactive with users. So using buttons is not necessarily a bad thing, but understanding the information hierarchy of the buttons that are presented is also something you need to take into consideration if you have multiple buttons on a single screen. The next thing that we want to talk about is animation, which I like to call the delightful distractor. Now, I think animation has a role within modern web design. Implementation of animation is great. It actually makes pages feel more performative, more responsive, as opposed to not using animation. Even though it may take a little bit of a longer time, users perceive when there's animation on a page, perceives those pages to be more functional than non-animated pages. But what are the problems with animation? Well, when animation is used incorrectly, it can be distracting to users. If you have things that are pulsing or looping on the page, what you will find is the user tends to be very easily distracted by motion, and they will not continue their goal throughout your site. Animation also has a performance hit when you implement it on your site. In today's modern web design, we can animate almost everything on your page, but different pieces of animation have different performance costs. And understanding what those costs are before you implement animation is also something that you want to take into consideration. So what are the better options for animation? We actually think animation is not a bad thing when it's used properly. And the rule that we tend to follow at Canopy is animation on interaction. We want the users to interact with something before we animate it. We also use animations to communicate a state change in an application. So for example, if something is currently being uploaded to the site, we will provide a little animation to give the user a little bit of feedback, but we tend to use minimal animation to reduce that distraction factor on users. And last but not least, this is our bonus one, which is autoplaying videos. Autoplaying videos, or videos in general, are a great way to implement sort of content engagement with users. But autoplaying videos specifically tend to be a detractor from your user's goal and their journey. So first off, autoplaying videos affect accessibility, which in turn affect search engine optimization. They also create some cognitive issues where users may get dizzy. Users that are sensitive to movement may get dizzy when they're interacting with these videos. Autoplaying videos do do slow down the initial page load as well, because not only is the page content having to load, the video is also having to load by default. And it can be distracting when a user is interacting with your page and they encounter something that plays automatically. That can be a visual distractor to their goals as well. Now, we actually think video is a great way for users to absorb content. Studies have shown that users actually spend 88% more time parsing video content than textual content. They have a 95% retention rate of video information as opposed to 10% for textual information. So how do you properly integrate video to maximize your users' engagement? Integrate video directly into your content. Rather than having videos that are played on an external website or videos that show up in modal windows, try to have that information directly integrated within your content and relating to the content that it's adjacent to. Choose to show slow-moving visuals rather than things that are flashing quickly on screen or moving quickly on screen. And last but not least, avoid modal windows to play videos. Rather than having something pop up to play the video and block the rest of the page, try to integrate your video content directly within your site. So there's our 5 things that can affect your usability design and how you can tackle them. Thank you very much for your attention today. I'm going to open up the floor to questions. If there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. And while we're at it, we're also going to share the slide deck after the presentation. There is some additional information that you can read that will answer or elaborate on some of the points that we've talked here today. Sorry?
You see the question now. It says, do you have a suggestion about linking to other pages on your site? New tab or same tab?
Danny, thank you so much for the question. That's a great question. Same tab if you're linking to pages on your internal site. If you're linking to another website somewhere on the web, an external page, we suggest that you open that in a new tab. The reason for that being is you always want the user, if they're visiting another site, to be able to quickly get back to yours without having to interact with the back button.
We have a slightly different suggestion usually, and that's if you need to open up something that you need to compare back to the old site, such as a video or a table or something that you need to use as reference. That's when we normally open a new tab for our group. But yeah. It actually, so Judy asked if opening a new window impacts mobile user experience. It depends. Sometimes when you open a new tab, it can open it in a place that you don't see. We've seen that with usability testing, but a lot of browsers are getting very sophisticated about when they open a new tab, it becomes the focus, especially in mobile. That wasn't true about 5 years ago, but nowadays, Safari, Firefox, Chrome for your mobile device will focus into the new open window. But I also want to make a caveat. When you do start opening up new windows, then suddenly you have tab-itis that happens, and that can be a cognitive issue with users as well. So that's why we suggest opening it into the window that you're in.
I see there's another question that asks about how would we suggest organizing menus that are on a vertical bar instead of the standard drop-down menu from the top of the window? There's a couple of ways that you can do this. The most obvious would be alphabetically, but one of the ways that we look at it is we tend to put the things that are most important to the user at the top of those vertical menus and things that are less important further down on the page. What this does is it opens up a couple of avenues for us. One, it means that if the user's on mobile, they don't have to scroll as far down to get content that is important to them. But it also means that if you're presenting information, you're presenting that information in a hierarchical manner that is going to address the user's needs earlier in their journey. I hope that answers your question, anonymous attendee.
That was a very good answer. It's all true. Okay, so paradox of choice. This is from Dave Stewart. People claim they want choices, but too many hinders their making a decision. That is true. That's why I think Cliff was talking about sort of grouping your content. So you can put everything up on your website, but this kind of goes into content strategy a little bit too. It's like, how do you group things so they become more manageable to a user? But also it depends on the user, because sometimes they want everything. It depends on who's the audience and kind of what are their styles of looking at things. Because we have created websites where we list all the taxonomy terms because they want to see it all right there, or they use Control F. We found that this user group really uses Control F and they don't really have a natural grouping. So sometimes we do show everything at once. So it kind of depends on what's the need and who are the users. But usually you do like to group things into manageable bits.
I agree as well. I think understanding what your users' technical abilities are determines the amount of choice that you give them. And the more highly technical your users are, or the more familiar the user is with your content, the more choices you can present to them as well, because you'll know they'll be able to navigate those choices skillfully.
Any other questions? These are good questions. Thank you for posting that, Jill. If you look inside of the chat, Jill did a TED talk about the paradox of choice. Okay. Just as a note, I'm on Slack and on Teams, so if you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me, and I can always forward stuff over to Canopy, or try to answer your questions about any other sort of design mistakes, or if you think about something later on, you can always reach out to me. Jason Janes, I'm on the Teams, Slack, hit me up. Yeah, so, and just a reminder that there will be a recording of this sent out to everybody, so you'll be able to refer to it as well. Well, that's about it. So I just want to thank everybody for attending. I want to thank Canopy and Cliff. These were really seemingly obvious, but we see it quite a bit that people do these mistakes. So it's just good to know that they exist and know that there are solutions that we can use that are better. So thank you very much.